At 112, I still cook in my own kitchen. That may sound ordinary. At my age, it is not. A kitchen means you can still make a choice. You can peel an apple, stir a pot, and put something warm on the table without waiting for somebody else to do it for you. A few winters ago, I nearly lost that. It was late afternoon. Rain tapped against the window while a pot of soup warmed on my stove. I reached for the lid and it slipped from my hand. My hand was not shaking. It simply felt weak. I bent to pick the lid up, then realized I was not sure I could stand again without holding on to something. So I sat down on the kitchen floor. I had not fallen, but for the first time, I did not trust my body to finish making dinner. My daughter arrived early. She found me against the cabinet with the soup still on the stove. She looked at me and said, "Mom, maybe you should not be doing all this alone anymore." She was not only talking about supper. She was talking about my house, my independence, my life. Those words frightened me. So I began with 4 meals, nothing expensive, nothing fashionable, just food I could make without exhausting myself. I will show you each one. But stay with me until the end, because food helped me feel steadier again. It was not the whole reason I stayed standing. The trouble did not begin on that winter afternoon. It had been arriving quietly for years. After I turned 108, I began taking little shortcuts. I would have tea and toast instead of breakfast. I would open a can of soup instead of making one. Some evenings I ate crackers at the kitchen counter because setting a table for one person felt like too much ceremony. I told myself I was being practical. But practical can become careless when nobody is there to notice. I bought fewer groceries so food would not go to waste. I stopped lifting laundry baskets. I sat down after dinner and stayed sitting longer than I meant to. Slowly, my world began to get smaller. My legs felt slower. My appetite grew thin. The meals I enjoyed became work. When my daughter asked whether I was eating well, I gave her the same answer. I'm fine. At 112, you learn those 2 words can hide a great deal. The truth was, I was not starving. I was not helpless. I was simply no longer feeding myself as though I believed I was worth the trouble. That is hard to admit. Because weakness is not always what takes a person first. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to stop making an effort for yourself. I did not need complicated food. I needed warm food, real food, and something gentle enough for an old body to welcome. So I did not begin by trying to change my whole life. I began with breakfast. Because before I could trust myself to stand at the stove again, I had to give myself a reason to get out of bed and walk into that kitchen. The first morning after I made that decision, I cooked oatmeal with walnuts, cinnamon, and apples softened in a little water. It was a small bowl, but it was the first meal I had made for myself in a long time that felt like care instead of convenience. For years, my mornings had begun with tea and a slice of toast. I told myself I did not need much, but by 10 o'clock I felt hollow tired and unsteady on my feet. I had mistaken a light breakfast for a sensible one. So I put half a cup of oats in a small saucepan with water and a little milk. While they simmered, I sliced 1 apple and cooked it with a splash of water and a shake of cinnamon. No sugar. The apple gives enough sweetness once it softens. Then I spooned the oats into a bowl, set warm apples on top, and scattered a small handful of walnuts over everything. It is simply warm, soft, filling food that gives an old body something steady to work with. The oats stay with me longer than toast did, and the apples are gentle on a mouth that does not enjoy hard things the way it once did. My husband loved the smell of apples and cinnamon. After he died, I stopped making them. The scent made the house feel too quiet, but I made them anyway. I stood at the stove with the spoon in my hand, waiting for sadness to come. It did, but gratitude came with it. At 112, a good morning is often decided before 9 o'clock. Not by a miracle, by whether you give yourself something warm, filling, and worth sitting down for. And once I had learned to begin my day that way, I was ready to make lunch feel like care for myself too. By lunchtime, I was often already tired. That was when I used to reach for crackers, canned soup, or anything that could be eaten without making a real decision. But after that first week of proper breakfasts, I wanted one meal that could carry me farther without asking too much from me in return. So I began making chicken and white bean stew. I use chicken thighs because they stay tender. I warm a little olive oil in my old Dutch oven, then add chopped onion, carrots, and celery. When those soften, I add the chicken, white beans, and enough broth to cover everything. Then I lower the heat and let the pot take its time. After an hour, the chicken turns soft enough to pull apart with a fork. The carrots sweeten. The beans make the broth thick and comforting. I add black pepper, a little thyme, and sometimes lemon at the end. That one pot gives me dinner, then lunch the next day. I judge a meal by whether I can still live my day after making it. The chicken gives me protein. The beans make it filling and gentle. But the gift is that it lets me cook once without starting over from nothing tomorrow. The first time I made a full pot again, I had more than I needed. For years, I would have packed it away and eaten alone. Instead, I filled a small container for my daughter and left it by the door for when she stopped by. The following week, I made another container for Walter, my neighbor across the street. His wife had died that spring, and I knew the look of a kitchen that had gone too quiet. I did not tell him I was trying to get stronger. I just said I made too much. But that was not the truth. The truth was, cooking for someone else made me feel useful again. And once I remembered that food could carry care from one home to another, I began looking for meals that were even simpler on the tired days. One of those days came after I had spent the morning changing bed sheets. By noon, my legs were tired, my back was complaining, and chopping vegetables felt larger than it should have. That was when I learned to keep one meal in my cupboard that asked little strength sardines over warm rice with greens. I know what people say when they hear sardines. They wrinkle their noses. They think of old pantries and hard times. Well, I have lived through enough hard times to know that food does not have to be fashionable to be good to you. I warm leftover rice in a small pan with a spoonful of water. In another pan, I soften spinach or collard greens with olive oil and a little garlic. Then I open a tin of sardines, lay them over the rice, squeeze lemon across the top, and add the greens beside them. That is all. Fish like sardines give an old body protein and those omega-3 fats that have long been associated with heart and brain health. When I eat the tiny, soft bones, I get a little calcium too. The greens bring color and life to a plate that would otherwise look plain. But I did not make this meal because of a chart. I made it because on a tired day, it let me sit down to something real before I could talk myself into eating nothing. There is a difference between eating whatever happens to be nearest and feeding yourself with intention. That plate reminded me that I was still capable of choosing the second one. But there were days when even that simple meal asked more of me than I had to give. On those days, I made red lentil soup with ground turkey and zucchini. It is my bowl when appetite is small, legs feel heavy, or I have spent too long pretending I am less tired than I am. Red lentils are kind that way. They soften quickly. They do not need soaking. They turn broth into something thick and warm without asking you to stand over the stove all afternoon. I start with a little ground turkey in the bottom of a pot with just enough olive oil to keep it from catching. I break it apart with a wooden spoon, then add chopped onion, a carrot, and zucchini cut into little pieces. After that, I pour in red lentils and broth. I let it simmer until the lentils begin to fall apart and the vegetables soften into the soup. The turkey gives the bowl some staying power. The lentils make it soft and filling. The zucchini keeps it gentle. Best of all, I can do much of the work sitting at the table first. I can chop slowly and rest while the pot does its work. A few days after my daughter found me on the kitchen floor, I made this soup again. I chopped the vegetables sitting at the table. I moved slowly. I did not want her to think I was pretending nothing had happened. I wanted her to see that I was learning how to do things differently. Then I set 2 bowls on the table. When she arrived that afternoon, she stopped in the doorway and looked at them. "You made lunch?" she asked. "I made enough for both of us," I said. She sat down without arguing. We ate slowly. She told me about her week. I told her the soup needed more pepper. For the first time in months, neither of us was talking about what I could no longer do. We were simply having lunch. That mattered more than I can explain even now. I was not trying to return to the woman I had been at 60. I was learning how to remain myself at 112. Those 4 meals helped me do that. But after a while, I had to admit something harder. They were helping my body. They were not by themselves answering the deeper reason I had begun to fade. The 4 meals gave me steadier mornings. They gave me strength at the counter, patience for a walk to the mailbox, and fewer days when I treated a cracker as dinner. But food was not the whole secret. I have known people who ate better than I did. They bought every powder, followed every new rule, and walked each morning. Still, something in them seemed to close up, and I understood why. Mine had begun to close up too. After my husband died, I told people I was managing. After my friends began passing away, I said the same. When my daughter asked whether I needed help, I said it again. Sometimes managing is only a polite word for disappearing slowly. The real change began when I stopped lying to myself. I was lonely. I was tired. I was afraid of becoming a burden. And I had treated every offer of help as proof that I had failed. It was not. My daughter bringing groceries did not take away my independence. Walter accepting a container of stew did not make me responsible for the whole world. Sitting down while I chopped vegetables did not mean I was giving up. It meant I was learning to adapt without surrendering. Over time, I came to hold on to 3 things. Tell the truth early. Do not wait until a small problem becomes a private emergency. Choose compassion. Let people care for you, and do not let grief turn every kindness into something you push away. And practice patience. At 112, I cannot do everything quickly, but slow is not the same as finished. I did not need to prove that I was young. I needed to prove that I was still here. Once I began telling the truth, accepting care, and moving at a pace my body could trust, something else returned. A reason to get up tomorrow. That reason did not arrive as some grand new purpose. It arrived in small portions. On Sundays, I began making an extra pot of soup. Sometimes it went to my daughter after a busy week. Sometimes it went to Walter, who ate supper in silence after his wife died. Sometimes it stayed in my freezer until I heard that someone down the block had been ill. Cooking for another person changed the feeling of my kitchen. The pot was no longer proof that I could still take care of myself. It became proof that I still had something to offer. While the soup simmered, I called people. I checked on a neighbor. I wrote down a name I had not spoken aloud in years. I looked for one small way to make somebody else's day a little less heavy. That may sound simple. At my age, simple things are often the ones that keep a person alive. A body is easier to care for when someone is glad you are still here tomorrow. That is what I had forgotten. The opposite of growing old is not staying young. It is staying connected. I still need help sometimes. I let my daughter carry the heavier groceries. I sit down when my legs tell me to sit. But now I have a reason to make the soup set the table and walk across the street with one warm container in my hands. And that reason gives every meal more strength each day. So that is what I know now. At 112, I am slower than I once was. I rest before I stand. I let someone else lift the heavy bags. And some mornings my body still takes a little persuading. But I am no longer eating as though I am preparing to disappear. Tomorrow I will put something warm on the stove. I will pull up a chair. I will eat at a table. And I will remember that care given to yourself or carried to another person is still a reason to keep going. These 4 meals helped me, but sudden weakness, repeated falls, unexplained weight loss, chest pain, numbness, severe fatigue or dizziness deserve a real conversation with a qualified medical professional. For more stories about aging, strength, food, and staying independent, stay with the Senior Body. And now, make yourself something warm. Then call someone who would be glad to hear your voice before the day is done.